Good Friday afternoon, everybody. So we have some silly controversies going on. I talked a little bit about the God of War, Gamergate, or Gunnergate, or whatever you want to call it, that we had this week. That's a whole separate topic. So I've seen something recently about an old YouTuber that I used to watch back in the day called McJuggerNuggets. And if you say that too fast, you might say the wrong thing. But this guy, I used to watch his videos, and he is one of the biggest engagement farmers that I've ever seen in terms of like the content he used to do. Clickbait, I would say. Because he did an entire series where, I think the guy has some talent, and his dedication to the role that he played on the McJuggerNuggets show that he did is commendable. But the guy had this gimmick where he would go around and his dad would smash his PlayStation and take his shit away and ridiculous nonsense like that. It was all faked. None of it was real as far as I'm concerned. As far as I know, I believe, it's quite obvious it was just for show. And he made a very successful YouTube series around like 2015, 2016, 2014, around that era. And I believe he went to film school, and so he started doing his sort of, what do you call it, reality TV, but it was fake like reality TV is anyway. Most of it's fake, or if not fake, then it's certainly dramatized. So he did his little dramatization, and, good for him. But he's in hot water today because he and his wife announced that they were aborting one of their children that had Down syndrome. Now, I believe very strongly in the importance of repopulation. I think making more children is a good thing for society, or at least it's always been that way. But we're getting to a point now in society where you can easily make an argument that there are too many children and too many people and not enough resources and blah, blah, blah. We're not living in the Stone Age anymore. We're not living in an era where, when my grandparents were born, there was about 1 billion, I think just barely over 1 billion people on the planet, about 100 years ago now. And today there's 8 billion people, so I think that repopulation is very important. There's certain parts of the world that aren't doing too well with their population. So the thinking is you can never have too many, but at the same time you have to be responsible along with it. But he's being accused of being evil and a murderer and these kinds of things, and I think the way that maybe he announced it, this is a guy that, as I've said, he's known for clickbait and engagement farming, and I'm not suggesting that the story that he's telling is in any way fabricated. I don't think it is. I think he's telling the truth, but I think it's the manner in which he presented it that led a lot of people to give him the backlash. Although I have to say that according to the nature, by the virtue of what he did, I don't believe that he's evil or even necessarily perhaps it's a regrettable decision, but I think it could equally, if not more so, be regrettable to have a child that has Down syndrome. If I told you, and I'm not an expert on Down syndrome, but if I told you you're going to have a child with no arms and no legs that was blind and deaf, that's a bit of an exaggeration. But there are definitely children that are born that way. With some children will die not long after childbirth, or they will go the rest of their life with some kind of disability. Now, in the old days, there was no real way to test for these kinds of birth defects. You couldn't really know for sure what a child was going to end up with. I believe Ray Charles was not born blind. I think he was blinded by some accident when he was a child. I think Stevie Wonder was born blind shortly after he was born. And those are two of the most talented people that ever lived, but that is not something that you see very often, even among those groups of people with deformities of sorts. But the argument is, if you can know in advance that your child is going to have this, why wouldn't you consider terminating the pregnancy? After all, as George Carlin once said, not every ejaculation is worth a name. And I believe this. You can always make another child. It sounds very callous to say that, because we're kind of taught that the sanctity of life is, universal, but it's not really true. And it's true, you never know what you're going to get exactly. Maybe there are some Down syndrome people that are doing okay in life, but don't make it out to be some sort of blissful thing. There's a difference between being happy and being oblivious, and I think we have a lot of people with or without Down syndrome that are quite obviously oblivious in the world that we live in, and let them be that way. But this idea that it's something virtuous to have a child with disabilities is fucking coping. That's a coping mechanism. That's nonsense. Of course you want to have the healthiest child that you can possibly have. You want your child to grow up to be as big and as strong, as an intelligent, blah blah blah, as they can. And how much of that is nature versus nurture is always up for debate. But what's not up for debate is, number one, this is actually very much up for debate, is at what point in time is the fetus crossing over the threshold to being more than a fetus? I think if the child was already born, it would be a terrible thing. If they, kill their child, then they'd be up for murder. They'd be up for murder. And some people would say, well, if it was a pregnant woman that was murdered, it would be a double homicide, right? Because you'd be counting the child along with that. But that's mostly because of the intentionality behind the pregnancy. If your pregnant wife died, then you would consider it to be a double homicide because you probably want the child. But people get abortions all the time, and the beautiful thing about the legal system, it used to be, their right to do so. And I'm somewhere in the middle on abortion, because on one hand, of course, I believe in pro-choice. I've always believed it's a women's rights issue. If a man gets a woman pregnant, he doesn't really have a right to say, you're not going to have the child, you got her pregnant, and now it's not necessarily your responsibility to take care of the child, it's hers. But she's the one that has to carry the child to term, and it's her decision because it's her body. It's very simple. But I can also understand the pro-life argument, just not of the religious variety. If you're coming at me with, all life is sacred and it was God's plan, you're fucking nuts. You're retarded. Because you won't have anything to say for other children that are born with disabilities that clearly do not live meaningful lives. You're not going to say anything for the kids with cancer, that some of them die in infancy, some of them live a few years and die, some of them are, Quasimodo looking, and, of course there's some people walking around that are worse off than the Down syndrome people, as I've said. I don't think that every Down syndrome person, I think there's probably a spectrum of sorts. But, there are plenty of people, children born with horrible things wrong with them, and that doesn't mean that they're all incapable of being helped, but it does mean that you have a responsibility, if you know in advance, to make a decision. And these people would not have been saying anything in a different situation. I mean, this is a child that would not have been born under any other circumstances. This is the private matter of two people. They decided to make it public, but it's at their discretion and no one else's, so I'm not really sure why people are so upset about it. I think there are plenty of people having abortions for the wrong reasons, more so because they're irresponsible. This couple, very clearly, it seems to me, wanted to have a child, but but they didn't get the luck of the draw. And who can blame them? I don't understand why, under these circumstances, this is worse than if they had had a miscarriage. Plenty of women have miscarriages. She could have fallen by accident and had a tumble and lost the child in that way. Um, you never know. You never know. The same people that think that, or some of the same people that think this is so terrible, would have no problem going back in time and killing baby Hitler in the crib, right? Well, I think that would be a worse situation than aborting a potentially defective child. You know, you have to take emotion out of the equation and be logical here. We do not need more people in society that are dead weight. And it's not to say, every person with a disability is dead weight, but let's be real here. At a certain point in time, if you have someone that's not only physically handicapped but potentially mentally handicapped, there isn't much use for that person. And that doesn't mean you get rid of the people that are already walking around that way. You have to take care of them, or you should take care of them. That's the most humane thing to do. But if you can prevent that from existing, then and also replace. I mean, people will say, well, they should have had the child, and then maybe have another child that try again for a normal child. But think about how condescending that would be. You're gonna have one child that's and people have this situation. But you're gonna have one child that has severe deficiencies and another child that's completely normal. And how do you think that's going to make the person with deficiencies feel if they become aware of that, if they actually have the awareness of that? It's entirely, I think, should be the choice of the individuals. I don't think this state or society should be able to mandate that they must have the child. I think a little bit of the controversy is at what point in the pregnancy was the woman in question, and the child with the fetus in question. Not really a child because it was an unborn child. It was a fetus. Uh, that whole debate has been going on for a very long time. At what point the famous Seinfeld episode of at what point does the child at what point is the pizza in the oven just a ball of dough, and at what point in time is it pieces when it comes out of the oven? But I live under the guiding words of George Carlin, who said that not every ejaculation is worth a name. It's just not true. You know how many times I've jerked off in my life and have absolutely no children that I'm aware of, at least, that to show for. So yeah, this idea that it's sacred and that he's committed a cardinal sin is complete nonsense. I really wish people wouldn't be that hallucinatory. You may say it's a regrettable decision, but again, I'm going to say it could be equally as regrettable a decision to have had the child. You have no idea, and it's not your responsibility. There are plenty of people that have able-bodied children that can't take care of them, let alone, I can only imagine the stress of taking care of a child that will never maybe be able to take care of itself. And people are saying, oh, they had a dog with a disability and they kept the dog. I think that's, again, a big difference. The dog was already living. You do what you can for the living. There's no evidence that a fetus is living. Not by the true standard definition of what it means to be alive and to be conscious. I do not believe that a fetus is conscious or sentient. I don't know. Maybe there's... you know, maybe there's some science to that, but it certainly is an incoherent premise compared to what people that are walking around today would experience. It's not the same experience. So you can be upset about it, but ultimately you must see the pragmatic decision pragmatic decision there, regardless of who this guy is and what he's done in the past with his dramatized YouTube videos for clicks. I think that there's some people are gonna criticize the guy's response. I don't think his he probably shouldn't have said anything about it, but he puts his life out there, and people are gonna dog on him for saying that he's grieving the child that he just aborted, which I can understand. I can understand that line of reasoning. Yeah, you can't simultaneously. It's difficult for you to grieve for the child and also to have aborted the child. I understand. I agree with the people saying that. But it's also sensible to say, well, he wanted to have a child. He just didn't want to have a Down syndrome child. And there is nothing unreasonable about holding that position either. Ultimately, everything about children, it's idealistic. You never know what kind of kids you're going to get or how they're going to turn out. It's only an idealist, and it's an idealistic proposition. The actual reality of having kids is very difficult. Statistically, it's not anything unmanageable because the vast majority of people have to deal with it. Everyone that's ever lived has had to deal with it in some capacity. You've either been a child or had children. So it's not some insurmountable task, but it's very difficult, especially for the average person and the climate that we live in. So I think people need to be more responsible. This wasn't a case of promiscuity gone wrong. It was simply, unfortunately, there are some horrible genetic things that can go wrong through almost no fault of the person's own, unless you're doing inbreeding, which can lead to some horrible byproducts. But you can't be upset at you can't say, well, it was God's child and he killed it, and then also disregard the fact that if it is God's child, then why did he intend for it to be Down syndrome? That's not exactly fair to anybody in a situation. So I would say ultimately it's I'm leaning to be pro-choice in this situation because of the smug nature of people responding, calling this evil and calling him a murderer. It's ridiculous nonsense. There are plenty of people that believe that abortion is murder, but it's based, I think, on a false premise. It would be different if it was a newborn child and they threw the baby out with the bathwater, but I don't really view it in that situation. But some people are arguing because of how far along they were, there's misinformation. I don't know how far along they were. I think it's a regrettable situation, but it's not a completely unreasonable situation whatsoever. And the response to it is really hyperbolic, is ridiculous. There were plenty of people, for example, that have test tube babies. You have women that cannot get pregnant or cannot give birth, so they have I forget what it's called, a surrogate mother. You have children born by surrogate. You have some children that have already had their DNA tampered with, or at least that's a theoretical possibility. I don't see the people saying that is murder when there are children that are being born that have been genetically modified. Even it isn't human children, we have genetically modified animals. We have genetically engineered life. So you may say it's a form of eugenics, but it's really simply wanting to be preventative. And I think it's a totally rational argument, unless you're some sort of religious fruitcake. I think you could say it's a sad situation, but calling the guy a murderer is downright libelous, I believe. It's a bit ridiculous. And I think there's a lot of people that are hypocritical, because I think there's a lot of people in that situation that would not know how to deal with that and would not want to deal with that. So I think that the backlash is very stupid, and it's not very productive to the conversation surrounding reproductive rights and the culture around reproduction, we need to have children for the right reasons. And more importantly than having the children is, of course, raising the children appropriately. But if you have a child that's going to have so many deficits at birth that put them at the back of the line of succeeding, that to me is just as cruel, maybe even more so than aborting the child. You can always have another child. Sounds terrible to say that, but we're talking about an unborn child. We're not talking yet about a child that had time on earth and you got to know them and fall in love with them and now they're gone. That's a different scenario. That's a different scenario, I think. To a fetus that did not have a name or a face or any characteristics to speak of. So, I don't know. Just another dumb controversy. I don't think it's a serious issue. There will be more children in the world. Hopefully, we will have children without disabilities because it's a coping mechanism. No one should have to have disabilities. Of course, no one's perfect, but we do not need more people that have disabilities, nor do we need more morons walking around that are seemingly perfectly able-bodied and minded, but just haven't got the clue. So that's what it is.